In 2019, they released Nancy Drew Files Volume 1, a collection of the first three Nancy Drew Files books. I assume this was meant to capitalize on the popularity of the Nancy Drew TV show. I don't think the people who made the TV show read the Nancy Drew Files. There don't appear to be any influences. Well, unless you include the fact that Nancy's making out with random dudes all the time. But I think they came up with that idea on their own, not because they were reading Nancy Drew Files number 1. Anyway, here are my reviews for those three Nancy Drew books. If they seem a little weird, it's because these were among the first book reviews I ever did back in 2014. So I thought, yeah, people will totally watch 15-minute book reviews. I wasn't quite right about that. You'll notice I used Donald Trump's picture in my review of book number 2 because he's a stereotypical angry New York businessman. That reference didn't age well, did it?
Today's Nancy Drew book is one of the 1980s romance mysteries, which is supposed to appeal to older readers. Ironically, the book has a reading level of 7+, which is for younger readers than the normal series. Does that mean the romance in this book isn't mature? Yeah, the romance in this book is awful. Nancy Drew Files number 4 is the mystery of the 80s perm. I mean, smile and say murder. It was first published in October 1986. The premise of the book is that Nancy is working for Yvonne Verdi, the co-owner of Flash magazine. Yvonne is a harsh businesswoman who likes to have the upper hand in everything, and when Nancy mentions mystery books, Yvonne dismisses them as too predictable. Well, I agree the Nancy Drew Files series can be predictable. That's still a mean thing to say to a detective you've just hired. Hey Yvonne, if you hate mysteries so much, why are you in one? Yvonne started receiving death threats after a big company offered to buy Flash magazine for $10 million. Yvonne believes the culprit is her partner and photographer, Mick Swanson. Mick is suspicious because he has a horrible, violent temper, but I'm more concerned about the fact that Mick doesn't know the difference between your and your. That is culprit level evil right there. How is this guy the co-owner of a magazine if he doesn't know basic grammar? Nancy worries that she's in over her head, so she calls her boyfriend Ned for help. Ned is a little bitter that she canceled their spring break plans without consulting him. Not for the first time, I might add. After giving Nancy a lot of grief, he reluctantly agrees to join the investigation. Nancy's first job is to help Mick with a photo shoot. Here, she meets Mick's younger sister, Sandra. Nancy believes that Sandra is incredibly attractive and very nice. No, the author isn't questioning Nancy's sexual orientation. The author is doing a bad job at foreshadowing. The next day, Mick summons Nancy to his office. It turns out that he's a nice guy under his rough exterior. In fact, he enjoys reading mystery novels, like Agatha Christie and the Hardy Boys. And wait, what? But Nancy is on a first-name basis with the Hardy Boys. That means the boys are real, but they're fictional books about the boys. Oh, my brain hurts. After this, Nancy sees Ned talking with Sandra. Nancy has a complete meltdown here, because it looks like Sandra is flirting with Ned. Now, are they flirting? No. Doesn't matter to Nancy. She wants to slap that nasty girl hard. Oh, and she wants to slap Sandra too. With all the fury of an angry 2-year-old, Nancy openly confronts Ned and starts insulting him. He tries to explain that she's jumping to conclusions, but she interrupts every sentence he says, and she has to run away in tears because of her faithless boyfriend. Nancy, all he did was talk to another girl. Get over it. In the next chapter, Nancy wonders if the situation is related to Daryl Gray from the first book. Hey, yeah, let's talk about that, shall we? In Secrets Can Kill, Nancy talks to Daryl Gray. Oh, did I say talks? I meant Nancy makes out with Daryl Gray multiple times. This culminates in a date with Daryl, where Nancy purposely decides to kiss him, even though she knows Ned is watching. Yeah, Nancy, you have no leg to stand on here. You're a bigger cheater than Ned will ever be. Back with the mystery, a gun is fired in Yvonne's office. Yvonne says an armed gunman attacked her, and she pretends to faint. Nancy should find it suspicious that Yvonne is clearly faking, but she's too distracted by the fact that Ned entered the room at the same time as Sandra. Oh, that horrible cheating man! A few minutes later, Nancy sees Mick inside his office with a gun. Mick claims the gun isn't his, and a struggle ensues. The gun goes off just as the police arrive, and they are both taken into custody. After the forensics test, Nancy is allowed to leave, and Mick is formally arrested. Sandra bursts into tears because her brother is now in jail. Nancy flies off the handle because Ned tries to comfort her. How dare he have compassion for someone whose family member was falsely arrested? Nancy decides never to talk to Ned again. That'll teach him to be nice to crying women. Mick is only in jail for a day, though, because Nancy clears him of all charges. Not only is there photographic proof of his alibi, but the threatening letters to Yvonne indicate that the writer does know the difference between your and your. Saved by bad grammar, Mick. Nancy returns to the magazine offices where Yvonne fires her. Aw, poor Nancy. The next chapter begins with Nancy and Mick inside a limousine, openly flirting with each other. See, I told you she's a cheater. The two of them are dressed up in fancy clothes because they're attending a magazine's award show, sort of like the Oscars. I was confused by this section, so I had to reread it a few times just to make sure it wasn't a dream sequence. It's not. The book randomly jumps forward a week to an event that was never mentioned ahead of time. Mick casually mentions that Yvonne once wrote a mystery novel, and everything falls into place for Nancy. Yvonne wrote a mystery, so she must be the culprit. That's an illogical conclusion. Even worse, the book openly admits that Nancy's reasoning here is stupid. I see, Yvonne said. Then it wasn't a flaw in my planning. It was just a silly coincidence. Mick mentioning that I wrote mysteries. Silly coincidences are a detective's best friends, Nancy said seriously. I've rarely solved a mystery without one. Nancy Drew, solving mysteries through dumb luck since 1930. When Nancy arrives at the office, Ned is with Sandra. Sandra puts her foot down, and she forces Nancy to listen to them. To Nancy's surprise, and no one else's, there is no romance going on between Ned and Sandra. Nancy would have known that if she actually bothered to listen to her boyfriend. I'm serious, this is the first time in 60 pages that Ned has been allowed to speak a full sentence. Still, the book doesn't want to admit Nancy was in the wrong here, even though she clearly was, so the blame falls on Ned, who must have been getting an ego trip from his jealous girlfriend. Right, because guys love getting yelled at for doing nothing wrong. Nancy concocts a half-baked plan to get Yvonne's confession on audio tape, but Yvonne pulls out a gun. She explains the clever trick she used to frame Mick, then she ties up our three teenage heroes in the photography darkroom. She starts a chemical fire near the tape, then leaves. Nancy unties Sandra's hands with her teeth, and once they're untied, they use a sink and a bucket to put out most of the flames. Nancy grabs the miraculously undamaged audio tape and takes it to the police. The final chapter is Ned and Nancy together again. They recap what has happened at the magazine offices while happily sharing kisses. It's supposed to be sweet, but it's incredibly unrealistic. Here's what happens. Ned admits that he kissed Sandra off-screen, even though the book already confirmed nothing romantic happened between them. Nancy asks for a kiss comparison. Ned kisses Nancy and confirms that she is a better kisser. Nancy non-verbally decides that she and Ned belong together, but it's still okay if they cheat on each other occasionally. Seriously, people, you can't make this stuff up. For the majority of the book, Nancy is ready to dump Ned because he talked to another girl. But in the end, she does a complete reversal and decides that committing adultery is perfectly fine by her. This is supposed to be a successful relationship? No. 100 times, no. Ned, you need to break up with Nancy immediately. She's cheated on you before, and she's going to cheat on you again. You deserve better than that. The book ends with Nancy deliberately lying to Ned about her future plans, so you know she's never going to change. Post-book follow-up. Normally I don't like Ned, but I am 100% on his side here. Nancy Drew is a horrible girlfriend in this book. Simply put, she's incredibly immature. As I said at the start of this review, the book has a reading level of 7+, and I concur. Nancy acts like a 7-year-old with her constant temper tantrums. While it's true that the romance drama in this book is superior to the previous one, jumping from awful to mediocre isn't enough to get my approval. I'm getting sick of the way that the Nancy Drew Files series forces Nancy and her friends to act out of character just for the sake of creating romantic drama. The series also has a bad habit of including unimportant suspects who only appear for 2 pages. We have 2 of them in this book, Yvonne's boyfriend and Brenda Carlton, the amateur reporter who usually screws up things for Nancy. It's kind of funny, actually. Nancy spends 2 whole pages worrying about Brenda, and Brenda only talks for 1 paragraph. Talk about disproportionate. I like continuity, so I was happy when they mentioned the love interests from the previous books. George has a date with the guy from book 3, and Bess is unsure about her relationship with the guitar player from books 1 and 2 because she hasn't seen him since he went on tour. Nancy mentions Daryl Gray from book 1, but since his name is misspelled, it really detracts from the continuity nod. All in all, this book probably deserves a 4 out of 10 because it's a tad below average. My final score will be lower than that, since the book is saddled with badly done romance sections that make Nancy an unlikable hero. I give Smile and Say Murder a 2 out of 10. Welcome to Nancy Drew Book Reviews. Today I'm reviewing Nancy Drew Files number 5, Hit and Run Holiday. Even though the book was published in November 1986, the premise is that Nancy and her friends are on spring break in Florida. Spring break in November? What? Nancy stops to check up on Kim Baylor, the daughter of one of her neighbors. Nancy overhears Kim having a heated phone conversation with someone named Ricardo. Kim then rushes outside, where she gets hit by an unmarked car. Kim blames Rosita, then she slips into a 60-page coma. After taking Kim to the hospital, Nancy returns to Kim's motel. Someone broke in and ransacked the room! Amid the mess, Nancy finds some things that indicate a second person lives with Kim. She also finds a photo strip of Kim with a Hispanic woman, presumably Rosita. Nancy's search is interrupted when someone breaks into the room. Including Nancy, that makes 3 intruders in 5 minutes. Wow, Kim does not live in a safe neighborhood. Nancy hides in the closet while the intruder steals a few things. Later on the beach, Nancy sees the intruder again. His name is Ricardo, and he is a lifeguard. Nancy asks him about Kim, but he gets angry and refuses to say anything. Out of spite, Ricardo purposely lets Nancy step on a jellyfish. That's kind of a weird way to injure someone. Here, I'm going to trick you into stepping on my strategically placed jellyfish. Also on the beach, Bess is flirting with Dirk Bowman, a hunky blonde with horrible taste in swimwear. Dirk works for a boating company that takes people to a nearby island for nighttime parties. The instant Nancy mentions Kim, Dirk attaches himself to her and begs her to meet with him so they can discuss the case. Nancy and Dirk set a date, and Bess is definitely unhappy Nancy stole her romantic interest. Dirk takes Nancy to Party Island the next day, but they make no progress in the investigation. Nancy sees Ricardo moments before she is almost killed in a windsurfing accident. It's starting to sound like Party Island is badly named. Either way, Ricardo is now Nancy's prime suspect. The owner of Party Island is Lila Templeton. Her family bought the island and party business with the proceeds from their orange farms. Bess and George accept Lila's invitation to visit Party Island that night, but since Nancy has seen the movie Pinocchio, she decides to pass. Instead, Nancy tracks down the Hispanic woman in Kim's picture. Her name is Maria, and Nancy can only half understand her since Maria speaks Spanish. The book takes a surprisingly serious turn at this point as Maria tells her story. She is an illegal immigrant from an unnamed country which I like to call Cuba. The Cubans pay a lot of money to be smuggled into America, but when they arrive, they are forced to work as slaves on a farm. The worst part is that they can't go to the police for fear of deportation. The slave traders arrive and knock Nancy out. When she wakes up, she's tied to a support beam on the dock. The tide is coming in, and she's going to drown soon. In a more desperate than usual struggle, Nancy manages to escape with her life. Nancy decides to go to the police immediately, but she's interrupted when a corpse is found on the beach. It's Ricardo, and he was also killed by the slave traders. So much for Nancy's theory that Ricardo is the culprit. To be honest, though, I never suspected Ricardo of any wrongdoing. This is the 5th book in a row in the Nancy Drew Files series where Angry Man has been one of the innocent suspects. From now on, if we have angry men in this series, I'm going to presume they're innocent. Instead of going to the police, Nancy goes to her room and collapses on her bed. Bess happens to mention that Lila Pendleton's boat is named the Rosita, and everything clicks into place. Party Island boat tours are just a front, so Lila can bring in Cuban slaves for her family's orange farm. Great, so now Nancy goes to the police and no. Nancy, Bess, and George decide that they're more than enough of a match for the murdering slave traders. The plan goes as badly as you would expect. The villains notice Nancy's distinctive reddish blonde hair, unlike the cover artist, and our heroes are captured and thrown below deck. Dirk is assigned to be the guard, and Nancy escapes from the room by knocking him unconscious with her karate moves. Darn. I was hoping that Nancy's magical karate moves from Book 2 would be a one-time thing, but it looks like they'll be a regular feature of this series from now on. If Nancy can easily knock people out in a few seconds, why doesn't she do that to the culprits in every book? The rest of Nancy's escape goes badly. She swims to Party Island, where she gets chased by Lila's guards. In a surprise twist, Nancy learns that Dirk got to the island before her, even though he was unconscious 5 minutes ago. No, wait, that's not the twist. The twist is that Dirk is secretly an undercover cop who is working to bring Lila down. He managed to get Nancy's friends to safety on a speedboat, and now it's time to escape. But Dirk was unconscious 5 minutes ago. How did he have the time to do all of this and still arrive on the island before Nancy? Nancy drives the speedboat to shore while the villains give chase. She escapes by running full speed at a sandbar. The speedboat goes flying through the air to safety while the villain's boat gets trapped. In the end, Kim returns to full health and Maria becomes an American citizen. Dirk visits Nancy before she leaves Florida. Logically, he should be mad because Nancy is an irresponsible teenager who ruined his investigation and blew his cover, but he's actually happy about that. He kisses Nancy twice before she reminds him that she has a boyfriend. She doesn't remember that she has a boyfriend. I'm just joking again. She reminds him that they abandoned a bunch of people on Party Island. The end. Post-book follow-up. The first third to half of this book is somewhat weak. Nancy's investigation makes very little progress, and it feels like all she does is wander across random tangents. For example, she doesn't look into Ricardo, who is her only suspect. Instead, she focuses on Dirk and Lila, who have no apparent connection to the attempted murder. The turning point of the book is the introduction of the slave trade plotline. I never expected to see human trafficking come up in a Nancy Drew book, and the topic is handled quite well. It provided what was lacking in the first half of the book, an emotional connection between Nancy and the case. It helps that the storyline becomes more focused at this point, too. The quality of the escape scenes varies a bit too much for my taste, but they're fine overall. The premise of the final third is a little tenuous. Nancy should have contacted the police like she originally planned to do, instead of charging into a dangerous situation where she once again gets captured and has to escape. I didn't mention this in my review, but the book features a lot of random guys hitting on Nancy. As in, at least 5 different men start flirting with her. I guess they like her 1980s swimsuit or something. Nancy turns them all down, and upon reflection, it's a somewhat odd subplot. Overall, the book is okay. The good parts sort of balance out the bad parts, and while I wouldn't put it on my must-read list, it's definitely not on my must-avoid list either. I give Hit and Run Mystery, which pretty much ignored the hit and run mystery, a 6 out of 10. I think the 1980s Nancy Drew Files series could do a better job with its book titles. Sure, they're dramatic, but I would prefer descriptive titles, like these ones. High School Murder. The Missing Musician. High School Murder Again. The Awful Book. Avalanches Cure Amnesia. Book number 6, Whitewater Terror, is arguably the first book in the series to have a good descriptive title. It was first published in December 1986. The premise of the book is that George has won 4 tickets to a whitewater rafting trip in Montana. She doesn't remember entering any contest, but who cares? It's a free vacation! George takes her cousin Bess, and Nancy takes her boyfriend Ned. The first chapter gives us a minor recap of the 2 previous books in the series. Continuity! Remember this continuity nod because I'm going to mention it later. The group flies to Montana where they find a rental car and instructions on how to get to the river. The road they take leads off a cliff, but Ned manages to stop the car before they crash and die. They find the driving danger barrier hidden in the bushes nearby, so you know it's not an accident. Somebody wanted to kill them. I would go home at this point, but our heroes continue. They walk down the pathway and meet the other rafters. Like George, everyone won free tickets for the trip, but none of them remember entering a contest. To make things even more suspicious, the locals have never heard of the rafting company before. The owner of the obviously fake company is Paula Hancock. Paula is angry to see Nancy. Nancy recognizes Paula from somewhere, but she can't remember where. The other leader of the trip is Max No Last Name, who is basically a rewrite of Luke from book number 3. That is, he's a hunky athlete who is still haunted by a death from his past, and Nancy's friend becomes romantically attached to him, too romantically attached to realize he could be dangerous. Hey, you know, speaking of Luke from book 3, what happened to him? For the past 3 books, we're told that George and Luke are still a couple. In this book, he never gets mentioned. That's kind of odd. Why didn't George invite her boyfriend along on this trip? She had 3 extra tickets. Paula orders Nancy to be the first person inside one of the rafts, and the raft instantly gets loose. Nancy is carried downstream, where she barely manages to steer away from some dangerous falls. She also avoids being attacked by gunshots, which turn out to be fireworks. By now, readers should have the premise of the book figured out. It's not really a mystery novel. It's more of an action book where the author tries to kill Nancy as many times as possible. I suspect the author is a culprit from one of the previous books. When the group has lunch, Nancy is almost mauled by a bear. Not long after, Max's raft is destroyed at Dead Man's Falls, and Bess almost drowns. Why? She took off her life vest because it wasn't pretty enough. Ugh. I like you, Bess, but you're an idiot. Paula's raft is destroyed that night, and as Ned says, they're really up a creek now. Ba-dum-tsh. The group has to climb up a gorge and walk to the nearest ranger station on foot. Paula gives the group's compass to Bess so she can steal it and make Bess look bad. Max notices and he asks to speak with Paula privately. They go off by themselves, and after a while, Paula screams for Max to stop. While all of the rafters watch, Paula's body goes flying off the 50-foot cliff and she dies in the waters below. Don't worry though, she's not really dead. It turns out that surviving a 50-foot cliff dive is really easy in the Nancy Drew universe. When the group camps for the night, Nancy is almost crushed by a gigantic rolling boulder. She also has a close call with a huge rattlesnake in her blanket. I suspect the author wrote this section after watching that Indiana Jones movie. The next day, Max stumbles out of the woods when the group is hiking. Max is innocent. The truth is that Paula faked her own death on the cliffside. She threw Max off the cliff, not the other way around. The rafters got it backwards because no one noticed the falling body was the wrong gender. Sure, I believe that. How does Max go about proving he's not a murderer? He pulls out a club and knocks Nancy unconscious. Then he ties her up so she can't escape. Oh, Max, you are not helping your plea for innocence here. Nancy breaks the ropes on a rock and knocks Max out with her karate moves. She reunites with the others and they hightail it to the ranger station. Paula is waiting for Nancy at the fire tower there, and we get an explanation. The contest and the entire rafting trip was a fake. It was all a trap so Paula could get revenge on Nancy. Why? Paula is related to the culprit that Nancy caught 2 books ago. That's why there was a big continuity nod at the beginning of the book. Okay, I'm lying. Paula is related to a culprit who has never been mentioned before, and it's a huge letdown. It would have been so much better if Paula's revenge plot centered around a character we know. What's the point of starting the book with a continuity nod, only to end the book with a revenge plot from an unknown culprit? Paula lunges at Nancy, but Nancy dodges. Paula falls over the railing and dies. For those of you keeping track at home, here's what that means. Fall off a 50-foot cliff? Easily survived. Fall off a 10-foot tower? Instant death. Max wraps up a few loose ends of the plot, and everyone goes home. The end. Post-book follow-up. There is not much mystery to this mystery book. The storyline is weak, and Paula's fake death is implausible. The author says that everyone mistook Max's body for Paula's because he was wearing her jacket at the time, but that's unrealistic. It's also unrealistic that he survives the huge fall, even though everyone watches the river and they don't see him resurface. It's further unrealistic that Max is able to climb the 50-foot gorge and make a 14-mile hike to the ranger station after such an ordeal. And, needless to say, it's unrealistic that Max violently attacks Nancy in order to prove he's not a killer. But, as I said earlier, this is an action book, not a mystery book. If you look at the book through that lens, it's pretty good. There's a lot of suspense and near-death escapes. There's also a sense of realism to the danger, because the majority of the near-death accidents are caused by nature. It's not attempted murder, it's Nancy trying to survive in the wilderness. That's much better than, say, Book 3, where Nancy dodged the murderer's attacks so many times in a row that it became ridiculous. I'm not sure if this is a rewrite of Book 3 or not. It seems odd that they would rewrite Book 3 so soon after it came out, but both books have a similar premise and an identical male suspect. Either way, what we have here is a case of the pseudo-remake being much better than the original. True, Paula's fake death was too far-fetched to believe, but it's still better than 9 foiled death attempts and an avalanche curing amnesia. I give Nancy Drew Files number 6, Whitewater Terror, a 7 out of 10.